I'd always prided myself on my instincts. After working as a private investigator for 15 years, you get a sense for when something's off. People think they can hide things, but body language and behavior always give them away. They say a detective's curse is being unable to turn off the job, and I guess that's true. So when my wife, Laura, started acting a bit strange about a month before our 10th wedding anniversary, I noticed. At first, it was subtle. More time on her phone, quick texts when she thought I wasn't looking, and occasional late nights at work. Laura was an accountant. Busy season wasn't uncommon, but the timing felt odd. I chalked it up to her being stressed about work or maybe, just maybe, planning something special for our upcoming anniversary. It was a milestone after all. I figured maybe she was putting together some big surprise for me, and I didn't want to spoil it. But then things got weirder. One night, I overheard her on the phone. She was speaking softly, hushed tones. I couldn't make out the words, but I caught her laughing. An odd laugh, almost flirtatious. When I asked her about it, she brushed it off, saying it was just her friend Megan, and they were planning a night out for her birthday. That should have put my mind at ease, but instead, it only made me more suspicious. The final straw came when I found an unfamiliar hotel keycard in her purse. It was late when I got home, and Laura was already in bed. I don't usually go through her things, but her bag was open, and the keycard was right on top, like it was practically begging to be found. My heart dropped. All the late nights, the phone calls, the secrecy. It didn't add up to anything good. The next morning, I tried to act normal. "Hey, are you free this Friday?" I asked over breakfast, testing the waters. I thought we could do an early anniversary dinner. Something casual. Laura glanced up from her coffee, and I could see her hesitate for a second too long. "Friday? Oh, I'm actually working late that night. We're closing out the quarter at work, and I've got a big deadline." Another late night. Another excuse, right? "Sure," I muttered, not wanting to push it further. By the time Friday rolled around, I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. My gut was screaming that something was wrong. I told myself I wasn't going to snoop, but that's exactly what I did. I parked outside her office building around 6 p.m., knowing that if she was telling the truth, I'd see her leaving for work soon. But she didn't. She didn't leave the office at all. Instead, she exited the building around 6:30, looking nothing like someone heading into a night of work. She was dressed up, way too dressed up for the office. A black dress, heels, the works. I followed her, keeping my distance, my heart pounding in my chest like I was tailing a suspect. She made her way downtown, and soon we were pulling up to a hotel. Not just any hotel either, the same hotel chain as the keycard I'd found in her purse. She parked, and I watched her walk inside. For a moment, I considered turning around, going back home, and pretending I hadn't seen any of it. But that wasn't who I was. I needed to know the truth. I waited 10 minutes, then followed. The hotel lobby was sleek, modern, and packed with people. I kept my head down, pretending to be just another guest. At the front desk, I casually asked if a Laura Jameson had checked in, claiming I was her husband and had lost my key. The receptionist didn't even blink before confirming she'd checked in about 10 minutes ago. Room 1206. I felt the walls closing in around me. My worst fears were coming true, and I hadn't even made it to the room yet. As I approached the elevators, I couldn't help but wonder what I'd find on the 12th floor. My mind raced through possibilities. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe there was some logical explanation. Maybe she was really planning a surprise for our anniversary. But deep down, I knew better. The ride up felt like it took forever, each floor ticking by as if time itself was dragging out the moment. When the doors opened, I stepped into the hallway and found myself standing in front of room 1206. I didn't knock. I didn't hesitate. My job had taught me that sometimes you just have to rip the bandage off. I slid the keycard into the slot, and the door clicked open. What I saw inside changed everything. I stepped into the room, the dim lighting casting shadows across the walls. My heart was hammering in my chest, but my training kept me calm. I wasn't prepared for what I was about to see, but at least I knew how to keep my emotions in check. For now. The suite was large, much larger than I expected. To my left was a small sitting area, and beyond that, the bedroom. I could hear the faint murmur of voices coming from the other side of the partially open door. My pulse quickened as I moved closer, trying to stay as silent as possible. The first voice I recognized immediately. It was Laura. She was speaking softly, almost giggling. But the second voice was deeper. A man's voice, calm and confident. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but the intimacy of the moment was unmistakable. I crept forward, each step feeling like it took a lifetime. When I finally reached the door to the bedroom, I saw them. Laura and a man I didn't recognize, sitting on the edge of the bed, drinks in hand, laughing like they didn't have a care in the world. It hit me like a freight train. There was no mistaking what was happening here. The casual closeness between them, the way she was looking at him with that familiar smile I thought was reserved for me. This was no business meeting. This wasn't a surprise anniversary plan. This was betrayal. I fought the urge to burst in, to demand answers, to confront her right then and there. But my detective instincts kicked in. I needed more than an emotional outburst. I needed clarity. Evidence. I pulled out my phone, snapped a few pictures through the gap in the door, and quietly backed out of the room. My mind was spinning as I made my way back down to the lobby, trying to piece together what I'd just seen. Who was that guy? Why here? Why now? Couldn't go back up there. Not yet. I needed to think, to figure out my next move. As I stepped out into the night, I realized I had two options. I could confront Laura immediately, blow this whole thing up and demand answers. Or I could take a more methodical approach, gather more information and figure out how long this had been going on. Maybe there was something deeper here, something that I wasn't seeing yet. I opted for the second choice. I wasn't just a husband scorned. I was a detective, and I needed to treat this situation like any other case. I wasn't just dealing with the end of my marriage. I was dealing with an affair, deception, and the possibility of much more than just infidelity. Over the next few days, I dug in. I started tracking her movements more carefully, paying attention to every text she sent, every call she made. I didn't want to believe it, but the signs were all there. Laura had been distant for months, making excuses to work late, attending business trips that I now realized were likely cover for rendezvous with whoever this guy was. I even started going through her emails, and that's when things started getting clearer. There were messages between Laura and someone named Peter, all casual on the surface, but with little hints of something more. Mentions of meeting at hotels, little inside jokes that made my stomach turn. Peter. That was the guy from the hotel room. I was sure of it. It was worse than I thought. This wasn't some spur-of-the-moment fling. It had been going on for months. Every time I thought back to the moments we'd spent together during that time, the dinners, the laughs, the nights we shared, I felt sick. How could she have been living a double life like this, right under my nose? But I wasn't done yet. I wanted more. I needed more. The investigator in me demanded it. A week later, I got my chance. Laura had told me she was working late again. And instead of tailing her to the hotel this time, I decided to get a closer look at Peter. Using the few details I'd gathered from her emails, I tracked him down. Peter Simmons, a marketing executive at some local firm. He was married, too, with 2 kids. This wasn't just some guy she'd met online or at work. This was someone with a whole life, a family of his own. And the more I dug, the worse it got. Peter wasn't just having an affair with Laura. He had a history of this. I found old social media posts, rumors on message boards, even an old court case where his ex-wife had tried to sue him for cheating on her with multiple women during their marriage. This guy was a serial adulterer, and now he had his claws in my wife. I started piecing it all together. How they'd met, how long it had been going on, and the lengths Laura had gone to cover her tracks. She wasn't just having an affair. She was fully invested in this other life, a life that had nothing to do with me. And now I had to decide what to do with it. With the truth staring me in the face, I knew I had to confront Laura. But charging in without a plan wasn't my style. I needed leverage, something to make sure this ended on my terms. More than anything, I wanted answers. Real ones. Not the lies she had been feeding me for who knows how long. That weekend, I told Laura I had a surveillance job outside the city. something that would keep me away for 2 days. She seemed almost relieved, which stung, but it worked in my favor. I needed her to believe I'd be gone. I packed a bag and made a show of leaving, but instead, I checked into a small motel nearby. I wanted to be close enough to monitor her movements, but far enough to give her no reason to suspect me. That night, I set up outside our house, hidden in my car with a camera. It felt strange, tailing my own wife like I would a cheating spouse in a case. But this wasn't just some client. I had skin in this game. I had everything in it. Around 8 p.m., I saw her leave the house. She was dressed to kill again, in a tight red dress that I'd never seen before. My stomach twisted at the sight of her, knowing she wasn't dressing up for me. I followed her downtown, careful to keep my distance. Sure enough, she pulled up to the same hotel where I'd first seen her with Peter. I watched from across the street as she walked inside, cool and confident, like she owned the place. Part of me wanted to run in there and drag her out by her arm, demand to know why she was doing this. But I stayed patient. I needed more. I needed to know exactly how deep this went. I parked and walked inside a few minutes later. The lobby was busy, couples and groups checking in for the night. I made my way to the elevators, my heart pounding in my chest. Just as I stepped in, I saw Peter entering the lobby, heading for the front desk. He had that same cocky look on his face, like he was in control of everything. The kind of guy who thought he could have it all and never face any consequences. I stayed close, watching him through the mirrored walls of the elevator as he got his room key and headed up. When he stepped off on the 12th floor, I knew exactly where he was headed. Room 1206. This time, I wasn't going to just sit back and watch. I had my camera ready, and I wasn't leaving without evidence. I waited for a few minutes, then crept up the hall and pressed my ear against the door. I could hear them talking inside, their voices muffled but unmistakable. Laura's soft laugh sent a chill down my spine. She sounded happy, happier than she had been with me in months. I snapped a few more photos, documenting Peter's arrival and their interaction inside. Then I did something I hadn't planned on doing. I knocked. There was a long pause, and I could hear them scrambling behind the door. Laura's voice sounded nervous now, panicked even, and I knew she hadn't expected anyone. After a few seconds, the door opened slightly, just enough for Peter to poke his head out. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone cool, but I could see the alarm in his eyes. I smiled, keeping my voice steady. "Yeah, I think you can. You must be Peter. I'm Laura's husband." His face went pale, and for a moment he didn't say anything. I could hear Laura inside, whispering something, but she hadn't come to the door. Peter tried to close the door, but I put my foot in the gap. "I'm not here to make a scene," I lied, keeping my tone calm. "I just want to talk." Peter hesitated, then stepped aside, letting me in. I felt a strange sense of power, walking into the room like I owned the place. Laura was standing by the bed, her face frozen in shock. She looked at me like I was a ghost, as if she couldn't believe I was standing there in front of her. "Chris?" she started, but I held up my hand. "Don't. Just don't." The room was tense, thick with the weight of everything left unsaid. Peter stood by the window, his hands in his pockets, clearly unsure of what to do. Laura looked at me, her eyes wide, like she was searching for an excuse, something to make this all go away. But there was no excuse. Not for this. "How long?" I asked, my voice calm, controlled. "How long has this been going on?" Laura looked down, avoiding my eyes. "A few months," she whispered, barely audible. "It didn't mean anything, Chris." "I didn't mean anything?" I snapped, my control slipping. "You've been meeting him in hotel rooms for months, lying to my face, and it doesn't mean anything?" Peter started to speak, but I cut him off. "You stay out of this. I'm not here for you. I'm here for her." I turned back to Laura, my heart breaking as I looked at her. "You were supposed to be my partner, my wife. We've been together for 10 years, and this is how you repay me." Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't moved. I'd seen too much, heard too much to feel anything but anger and betrayal. I needed to know why. I needed to know what had driven her to this. Why? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Why him? Why now? She didn't answer, just stood there, staring at the floor, her silence telling me everything I needed to know. Laura's silence cut deeper than any words ever could. I stood there, waiting, hoping she'd give me some kind of explanation. Something, anything that would make sense of what I was seeing. But nothing came. Just her standing there, her head bowed like a guilty child caught in the act. Peter, the bastard, was still standing by the window, looking like he wanted to be anywhere but in that room. I could feel his tension from across the space. He wasn't the confident guy I'd seen before. Now, he looked small, pathetic, like he'd finally realized the mess he was in. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to focus. I had to stay in control. The room was suffocating, filled with the weight of betrayal, but I needed to stay level-headed. Losing it now wouldn't get me the answers I needed. Why him, Laura? I asked again, softer this time, but with an edge in my voice. I wasn't going to let this go. She finally looked up at me, her eyes filled with tears. It wasn't supposed to be like this, she whispered. I didn't mean for it to go this far. Go this far, I repeated, almost laughing at the absurdity of it. You've been sneaking around behind my back for months, meeting him in hotels, and you're telling me it wasn't supposed to go this far? What exactly did you think would happen? She winced at my words, but I didn't care. I needed her to feel the weight of what she'd done. All those nights she'd come home late, all those lies she told me, it all hit me at once, and I realized I wasn't just angry. I was heartbroken. I don't know, she said, her voice breaking. It just happened. We met at a work event, and things just spiraled. Spiraled, I echoed, incredulous. Laura, spiraling is when you overspend on Amazon, not when you sleep with another man behind your husband's back. She looked away, wiping at her eyes, but the tears just kept coming. And as much as I wanted to stay mad, as much as I wanted to hate her, a part of me, probably the part that still loved her, felt the pain behind her words. But that didn't make it any better. It didn't change the fact that she had betrayed me. Peter finally spoke up, his voice cautious, like he didn't want to get any deeper into this than he already was. Look, man, I think it's best if I just go. This is between you two. I turned on him, glaring. Oh, now you want to leave? After you've been screwing my wife for months. Now you want to get out of this? No, you stay. You stay and face what you've done. He swallowed hard, clearly regretting every life choice that had led him to this moment. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Laura stepped forward, her voice pleading now. Chris, please, can we just talk? Alone? I looked at her, at the woman I'd loved for over a decade, the woman who had been my partner in everything, and now she felt like a stranger. I wanted to scream, to lash out, to make her feel the hurt that was tearing me apart. But more than that, I wanted to understand why. Fine, I said, my voice tight. Peter, get out. But don't think for a second this is over. He nodded quickly, grabbed his jacket, and practically ran for the door. The second he was gone, the room felt smaller, more intense. It was just Laura and me now, and there was no escaping what came next. She sat down on the edge of the bed, her hands trembling in her lap. I stayed standing, arms crossed, waiting for her to start. But she just sat there, silent again, like she didn't know where to begin. Why, Laura? I asked for what felt like the 100th time. What did I do? What was so wrong with us that you felt the need to go to him? Her lip quivered as she spoke. It wasn't you. It was never you. I clenched my jaw, trying to keep my anger in check. Then what was it? She took a deep breath, wiping at her tears again. I don't know. I was lonely, I guess. You've been so busy with work. And I didn't feel like we were connecting anymore. And Peter, he was there, and he made me feel noticed. Noticed. I spat, unable to hold back my frustration. So that's it? I wasn't paying enough attention to you, so you decided to sleep with someone else? How is that supposed to make anything better? It wasn't supposed to be like this, she said, her voice cracking again. I didn't plan it, Chris. It just happened. That's the second time you've said that, I replied coldly. Things like this don't just happen, Laura. You made a choice. You chose him. Over me. Over us. She buried her face in her hands, sobbing now, and for a moment, I just stood there, watching her. I should have felt something, some kind of sympathy or regret, but all I felt was numb, like I was watching this happen to someone else. You should have told me, I said, my voice quieter now. You should have come to me if you were feeling like this. We could have worked through it. We could have done something. But now, I don't know if there's anything left to fix. She looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen. I'm sorry, Chris. I'm so sorry. I believed her. But sorry wasn't enough. I turned and walked toward the door, pausing for a moment before I left. We'll talk more later. But right now, I need to be alone. And with that, I walked out of the hotel room, leaving her behind with her apologies, her guilt, and the ruins of everything we had built together. As I walked out of that hotel, the cold night air hit me like a slap in the face. I didn't even realize how long I had been holding my breath in that room. My body was still tense, my heart racing, but I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I needed space, time to think, to process what had just happened. I got in my car and just drove, not really caring where I was going. The city lights blurred past me as I tried to make sense of everything. How could it have come to this? I had always thought Laura and I had something solid, something real. Sure, we had our rough patches, but every couple does. I never thought for a second she'd turn to someone else. The betrayal felt like a physical wound, a deep ache in my chest that wouldn't go away. I replayed everything she'd said over and over in my mind, how she felt lonely, how she hadn't felt noticed. It wasn't a good enough reason. It would never be a good enough reason. But it was the reason she gave me, and I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, in some way, I had let her down. Had I been too wrapped up in my work? Too distant without realizing it? But no, I couldn't let myself fall into that trap. This wasn't my fault. We all go through difficult times in relationships, but that doesn't mean you betray the person you promised to be loyal to. She had choices. She could have talked to me. She could have asked for counseling. Hell, she could have just told me she wasn't happy. But instead, she had an affair. There's no excuse for that. As the hours ticked by, I found myself parked outside my office. It wasn't the most comforting place to be, but I didn't want to go home, not yet. Home didn't feel like home anymore. The thought of sleeping in the same bed where she had lied to me for months made my skin crawl. I pulled out my phone, staring at the screen. Part of me wanted to call someone, anyone, to talk this through. But who could I turn to? My parents? They would just be shocked and devastated for me. My friends? Most of them were mutual friends with Laura, and I didn't want them dragged into this mess yet. I felt completely alone. And then I remembered something. Something that had slipped my mind in the heat of the confrontation. My phone had recorded everything. Every word. Every tear. Every moment of awkward silence. Before I had knocked on that hotel room door, I had hit record on my phone and slipped it into my pocket. It wasn't a deliberate move. It was instinct, the detective in me always gathering evidence, always thinking ahead. And now I had the proof I needed. I played the audio back, my thumb trembling over the volume button as I listened to the voices echo through my car speakers. Laura's voice, shaky but clear, admitting to everything. Admitting she had been seeing Peter for months. Admitting that she hadn't told me because she didn't know how. And Peter's voice, trying to slink away, trying to absolve himself of guilt. It was all there. The truth. In cold, hard audio. The question now was, what was I going to do with it? The next day, I woke up in my office chair, my neck stiff from sleeping in such an awkward position. The sunlight was pouring through the blinds, signaling a new day, but I felt like I hadn't slept at all. My mind had been racing all night, tossing and turning between anger, sadness, and disbelief. I knew I couldn't avoid Laura forever. Eventually, we'd have to sit down and have the conversation, the real conversation about what comes next. But right now, I wasn't ready. I needed to do one more thing before I faced her again. I grabbed my phone and listened to the recording one last time, making sure everything was crystal clear. The audio was perfect, clear enough to use if I ever needed to. Then I made a call to an old friend of mine, a lawyer I'd worked with on a few cases. His name was Mike, and he was the best divorce attorney I knew. He answered on the second ring. "Chris? Long time, man. What's going on?" His voice was upbeat, as if he didn't have a clue about the storm brewing on the other end of the line. "Mike, I need your help. It's about Laura." I kept my voice steady, professional. I couldn't afford to let the emotions creep in. Not yet. There was a pause. "Oh, I see. What's happening?" "I need to start preparing for a divorce," I said, the words bitter on my tongue. "I have evidence. She's been having an affair, and I need to make sure this ends on my terms." Mike sighed, his tone growing more serious. "I'm sorry, Chris. I really am. But you're doing the right thing by getting ahead of this. Let's meet up and we'll go over your options. I'll make sure you're protected, especially if there's property or assets involved." We set up a time to meet later that afternoon, and I hung up the phone. It was strange saying the word out loud. Divorce. I never thought I'd be one of those people, one of those couples who fell apart because of infidelity. But here I was, and I needed to face the reality of it. Before I could dwell on it any longer, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Laura. "Can we please talk? I know you're angry, but I need to explain. Please come home." I stared at the message, my heart twisting in my chest. I wanted to talk to her, to demand more answers, but part of me also knew that nothing she said would change what had happened. The damage was done, and no amount of talking could undo that. Still, I needed closure. I needed to hear her side, no matter how painful it would be. So, I grabbed my keys and headed for the house, ready to face her again. The drive home felt longer than it had ever been, every mile stretching with the weight of the impending conversation. I had already decided there was no saving this marriage, but Laura's message had drawn me back. Maybe it was closure I needed, or maybe it was some stubborn, masochistic part of me that wanted to hear her try to explain the inexcusable. Either way, I was going to face her one last time. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed Laura's car parked outside. My stomach twisted in knots as I approached the front door. The same door I had walked through 1,000 times, but now it felt foreign. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was just a place filled with memories that had all been tainted. I hesitated at the door, taking a deep breath before turning the key and stepping inside. The house was eerily quiet. I could hear the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, but that was it. No footsteps, no voices. For a moment, I thought maybe Laura had left. Maybe she decided she couldn't face me after all. But then I saw her. She was sitting at the dining table, her hands folded in front of her, her face pale and drawn. She looked up when I entered, and for a brief second, I saw the woman I had fallen in love with all those years ago. The woman who had been my best friend, my partner. But that woman wasn't here anymore. She had been replaced by someone who had lied, betrayed, and destroyed everything we'd built. "Chris," she started, her voice shaky. "Thank you for coming. I know I've hurt you." I stood by the door, not moving any closer. "Hurt doesn't even begin to cover it, Laura." She flinched at my words, but I didn't soften. Couldn't. "I wanted to talk," she continued, "because I owe you an explanation. I know I messed up. I know I destroyed our marriage. But I need you to understand why." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Go ahead, then. Explain. I'm all ears." She took a deep breath, her fingers twisting together nervously. "It's not an excuse, but I've been feeling disconnected for a long time. I felt like you weren't really there anymore, like you were always so focused on work, on everything else but us. And I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared that if I brought it up, you'd just pull away more." Her words hung in the air, but they didn't have the effect she might have hoped for. I stayed silent, letting her continue. He was a mistake. He was just someone who listened, who made me feel seen. Started off innocent, just talking. But then things got out of control. I didn't mean for it to happen, Chris. I didn't want to hurt you." "You didn't want to hurt me?" I asked, my voice incredulous. "You've been lying to me for months, Sneaking around, meeting him behind my back. And you're telling me you didn't want to hurt me? Tears welled up in her eyes, but I wasn't going to let them sway me. I know, she whispered. I know I was wrong, but I need you to know that I still love you. Chris, I never stopped loving you. I lost my way. Lost your way, I repeated, shaking my head. This isn't about losing your way, Laura. You made choices. You chose to cheat, to lie, to betray everything we had. Don't try to make this about feeling disconnected or lonely. You had options. You could have talked to me, you could have asked for help. But instead, you threw it all away. She wiped at her tears, her breath shaky. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I'm asking for a second chance. Please, Chris, I want to make this right. Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. A second chance? After everything, she still thought we could fix this. I closed my eyes for a moment, gathering my thoughts before I spoke. Laura, there's no fixing this. You can't come back from something like this. I don't trust you anymore. And without trust, there's nothing. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. I'm sorry, she cried. I'm so sorry. I didn't move. I didn't reach out to comfort her. Couldn't. I'm filing for divorce, I said, my voice flat and emotionless. I've already spoken to a lawyer. We'll work out the details, but this is over. There's no going back. She looked up at me, her face streaked with tears, her eyes filled with desperation. Chris, please. But I cut her off. No, it's done, Laura. You made your choice, and now you have to live with it. For a moment, she didn't say anything, just stared at me like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. But then, slowly, she nodded. I understand, she whispered. I'm sorry. For everything. I turned toward the door, my hand on the handle. I'll be staying somewhere else for a while. I'll come by to get my things when I'm ready. With that, I walked out, leaving her alone in the house that had once been ours. As I drove away, the weight of everything hit me all at once. The marriage, the betrayal, the end of everything we had built together. But for the first time in days, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was over. It was finally over. As the weeks passed, the divorce process moved forward. Laura and I exchanged messages only when necessary, mostly about logistics, dividing assets, handling paperwork, the house. There were no more apologies, no more pleas for forgiveness. It was like she had accepted her fate, and in a way, so had I. I stayed with a friend for a while, trying to piece my life back together. The pain didn't go away overnight, but slowly, I started to feel like myself again. I threw myself into work, focusing on the cases in front of me, solving mysteries that weren't my own. And as time went on, I realized that I didn't need closure from Laura. I had already gotten it the moment I walked out of that hotel room. The truth had been laid bare, and I had made my decision. There was no going back. One evening, months later, as I sat in my office, the case files spread out in front of me. My phone buzzed with a new message. I glanced at the screen and saw Laura's name. For a second, my heart skipped, but then I opened the message. It was short, simple. I'm sorry. I hope you're doing well. I stared at the message for a long time before putting the phone down. I didn't reply. I didn't need to, because, for the first time in a long time, I was free.